Welcome back to the channel. This is Chris Morrison with lesson 6 of our Learning Greek by Reading the Greek New Testament series. Here we're just looking at one verse today, John 1 verse 14. As always, check the playlist in the description below if you want to make sure you had a chance to review the previous videos. For now, let's go ahead and jump right into our one verse, and I'll read it here in Greek. Should sound a little something like this. Kai halagos sarx egeneta, kai eskenosin in hemin, kai etheasamatha tain doxon autu, doxon hos monogonous para patras, pleres caritas kai aletheas. Now, since we only have one verse, our unique vocabulary is pretty short. Let's go through these pretty quickly. Then I'm going to show you something you'll find very useful. Aletheas roughly means of truth. Doxon means glory. Etheasamatha means we beheld or we looked upon. Eskenosin, meaning he, she, or it resided in or encamped with. Hemin, meaning to or with us. Monogonous, meaning only or the unique son. A unique daughter theoretically could be as well. Patras, meaning father. Pleres, meaning full. Sarx, meaning flesh. Caritas, meaning of grace. And then hos, meaning just as or like or as or something along those lines. Now, one thing you might notice from this list here is I've not given you a lot of information about the words, if they're genitive or if they're accusative or if they're nominative, things like that. And there's a reason that I want to introduce you to a tool, and we encourage you when you're building your flashcards to use this tool because it'll help you start to think through some of these and really learn it on your own. And I'm going to go over here to this site. All right, so the site that I have pulled up here for you is GNT, of course, stands for Greek New Testament, GNTreader.com. You can see it right there. This is not the only site that will do this. I've shown you one before, blueletterbible.com, but this one is particularly useful. We want to parse words. That is, we want to find out what kind of word it is. So if we look down here, I've chosen John chapter 1. That's what we got here. We'll scroll to verse 14 where we're at. We already know Kai. We already know Ha. Already know Logos. You know Sarx already. Egeneta, we know that word already. And so if we get, for example, eskenosin here, if you click eskenosin, you're going to be told here that eskenosin is in this verse, eskenosin is an aorist active indicative third person singular. It's an aorist verb from skenao. And then you can have the rough Strong's idea. The King James is to dwell. It means to tent or to encamp. In hemin, so hemin is one of words on vocabulary. It is a personal pronoun. In this case, it's dative plural from ego. Here you have etheasamatha, which is an aorist verb. There's your aorist. It's a middle indicative. We'll talk about middle voices in a future lesson. It's an aorist. It's a first person plural. So we, it comes from theomai, meaning to behold. So it's we beheld because it's aorist and it's first person plural. We, not we behold, it's aorist, we beheld. Doxon, of course, you click that. Here's your accusative singular. It's a feminine, so we beheld his glory. Monogonous here is a genitive singular masculine. Patras, in this case, is a genitive singular masculine. And so you can go through all of these. If you ever get lost as to what the particular parsing information is, you can go to a site like this, click it. I use this all the time. It is exceedingly helpful. So I would encourage you, as you look at your flashcards, look that information up. Since you have we're going through verse by verse right here, jot that information down. The very act of looking that up will help you remember it. I have found in my experience tremendously. So this is the words that we need to know. And based on that, once you have these words memorized, the translation becomes, once again, pretty, you get a good idea just from a wooden translation what's going on. So it's something like this. And the word flesh became, and it dwelled among us, and we beheld the glory of him. Glory as like the only begotten Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So we have a really good idea what's going on just from knowing the vocabulary. But as always, let's get some grammar ideas in here so we can smooth it out, and then we'll look at some interpretive suggestions. So let's first look at this one, the Kai halagos sarx egeneta. We have here a situation similar to John 1:1c when we said theos and halagos. We had two nominatives. Remember, theos is a nominative and logos is a nominative. Well, if you look, logos is nominative and sarx is nominative. Let me just show you to remind you. So if we go back to our gntreader.com, check on sarx, that is in fact a nominative singular. You might be surprised that a nominative singular has this C ending. Don't be, it's very common. Again, we'll talk about that later on. But we have this ha logos sarx agenata. Now, we've already learned that ha logos with the subject. So it's not flesh was the word or flesh became the word. It's the word became flesh because the ha, the definite article, tells us what's the subject. So then sarx is a predicate nominative. It's predicate because the predicate, remember, is it's the predicate, which is the verb, and all of its modifiers. So agenata is the verb, sarx is what it became. So sarx agenata sarx describes the subject ha logos. So we would call sarx a predicate nominative. And what this is going to do is it's going to name or describe the subject. So ha logos becomes something. What does it become? It becomes flesh. So once again, we're going to describe, compare this to John 1:1c, which I've already mentioned to you. Going back to this idea of the C ending, a quick sneak peek of where this is going. So this gets in what's properly called case endings. I've said to you several times in this series now that the spelling of words determines its function in a sentence, its cases. So you should grasp the idea now that if a word is in a nominative or an accusative or a genitive or a dative case or whatever, we know this by the way it's spelled. So for example, ha logos, that omicron sigma ending lets me know this is in the nominative. And actually this C ending lets me also know it is in the nominative. Now, but what is worth knowing, looking to the future, is that these case endings, which case endings you use, are going to depend on what is called a declension. What is this declension? Well, the best way to describe this is with some English examples that you're already familiar with. In English, to make dog a plural dogs, we just add an S. Use the same pattern for tree and you add an S, it becomes trees, but that doesn't work with all English words. I don't make child plural by simply adding an S. Child doesn't become childs. We add an EN ending and we smooth the pronunciation with the R. So children. And ox, you say oxen, is that same pattern. And there's another pattern with cherry, because the Y ending, we don't just say CHERYS, we replace the Y with an IE. So cherry becomes cherries with an IE. Lady becomes ladies. It's not laden or cherin, it's cherries and ladies. So it is the pattern that the word follows determines how you modify the spelling to determine, to in this case, let us know that it's plural. So it's the same thing in Greek. There's certain words that follow certain patterns. Those patterns are called declensions. There's 3 declensions for nouns in Greek: first declension, second declension, and third declension. Those, for a quick, again, sneak peek, roughly correspond with first declension is basically feminine, second declension is basically masculine, and third declension is its own thing that we'll talk about in some detail later. Just have an idea of that so when you see it, go, oh, that's what Chris meant. Now I follow. So again, sneak peek, we'll get into that later on, but maybe you're starting to have an idea of why spelling of words matter so much. Now what I want to do is I want to introduce you to a couple of your charts, and I want to encourage you to write this chart down. You need to know and just memorize this chart. This chart is extremely important. So at this point, you should recognize this as the definite article, basically your the and all the different functions that it has. You should recognize your nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative cases, your nominative in both your singular and your plural. And we have in Greek, we have a masculine gender, a feminine gender, and we also have a neuter gender. Now, this same word will be spelled differently depending on both its case, its number, and its gender. So for example, if it's a masculine singular nominative, the definite article is spelled ha. If it's feminine, it's hey. If it's neuter, it's ta. If it's genitive in the masculine or the neuter, it's to. In the feminine, a genitive singular feminine is taste. The dative in the masculine and the neuter is to, and the feminine is te. And notice with the te that the little iota is subscripted underneath there. So the iota comes from out from the end and brought back under the eta. Ton is the masculine accusative singular. Feminine is tain, feminine accusative singular. And then neuter accusative singular would be ta, same again as the nominative accusative. If you come across the word ta, how would you know if it is either nominative singular neuter or if it's accusative singular neuter? Well, context will always tell you that. And here's the plural endings, just with you can know where they are, but hoi, hi, and ta, tone for all three. So that's easy. Anytime you see a tone, you immediately know that's a genitive, plural genitive. Tois, tais, and tois, and then tus, tas, and again, ta. So you need to just memorize this chart, be able to reproduce it. And that is all of the versions of the articles. One I have in bold, you have not come across yet, but every other version of the article you have already seen. Now, if you have this memorized, then the next chart is going to be extremely easy. You have seen the word auton, meaning him or his, to him. So here is from the word autos. This again is your pronoun. All we're doing is we're taking the exact same endings and we're going to prefix them with the alpha upsilon. So autos, aute, auta, autu, autes, autu, auto, aute, auto, auton, autain, auta, autoi, autai, auta, auton, 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 autois, autais, autois, autus, autas, auta. Once again, I hope you see now that all you really have to know is this one word autos and have this chart memorized. And this is a really neat thing about knowing this chart and starting to use this to start learning the patterns. Previously, we would have treated all these as 24 different vocabulary words. But in fact, if you know this chart, it's only one vocabulary word, autos. And then all you have to know is this chart. So this one word actually covers 24 words. Same back here with your definite article. Rather than trying to memorize 24 different definite articles, you just memorize ha is the definite article, and then this is the chart. So as long as you know these two charts, and it's really just one chart because you're just memorizing this whole thing, and then just add the omicron upsilon at the end of all, with the exception of the nominative singular, you add this sigma on the end. So these two charts are extremely helpful, both for this sets of word, and also once you memorize this, it'll make the actual pattern for the declensions that we'll start introducing in the very near future much, much, much easier to run. So I strongly encourage you spend some time getting very familiar with these charts. Know them as well as you know your math tables. You remember when you were trying to memorize as a kid, what was 6 times 4? Oh, it's 24. You just memorize that, right? So it's the exact same thing here. Just know this. Just immediately know this. It'll make your life a lot easier. All right, so then let's go into some interpretive suggestions. Number one, let's look at this phrase again, in hamen. So once again, I want you to remember for the millionth time, get used to start feeling, get a feel for these prepositions. In doesn't exactly mean in. Sometimes it has the idea of among us. First of all, you have the idea that hamen is plural. And so to be in a group could have the sense of being among them. And so in can at times mean among. Imagine that you have this group of people, the plural is this area, and then you put someone inside that. Well, that's in them. It doesn't necessarily have the idea that some people say this is in me, inside of me, which that mistake can come up later in the interpretation of various New Testament passages. I'm not going to say to you that Jesus or the Holy Spirit doesn't dwell inside of you, and clearly he does. There are other verses that say that, but we need to be careful when we're interpreting to make sure that we don't overread the grammar. In hamen means among us in a case like this. So he tabernacled, he dwelled among us, because this is all talking about the incarnation. Kai halagas sarx egenata. He became flesh. Jesus's flesh isn't inside me. It's he dwells, he lives among us, that is his people. So yet another plug for getting a feel for words like preposition. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is word choice. Look at this contrast between doxon and sarx. So let's just ask, what glory is there in Christ's flesh? How do we behold this glory simply by looking at flesh? I want to suggest that part of what John is getting at is the surprise of not simply that the word becomes flesh. That's amazing in and of itself, but the fact that in seeing Christ in the flesh, that somehow that is how we reveal his glory. So if you were studying or preaching this passage, this would be something I would draw on. Their idea here is that what makes this glory is not flesh in and of itself, but the fact that it is glory like or as the only begotten of the Father. The only begotten of the Father. Now, we could talk about the importance of only begotten, and I encourage you a word study on that, but it's only begotten of the Father. So this is clearly a reference to God's glory. And then what is it about this only begotten of the Father? This makes him full of grace and full of truth. So in some sense, I invite you to meditate on, it is the glory that comes from the fact that he uniquely comes from the Father and therefore is uniquely full of grace and truth. This reveals not merely his glory, but therefore the glory of that gracious and truthful glory of the Father, and that we beheld this, and that we beheld it as he is dwelling among us. And this, I think, probably goes back in with some importance to the idea that his own, the Idioi, did not receive him. Remember, they did not, par elabon, they did not receive him. But the minute he said did receive him, he gives them the power to become the children of God. So all this is really tightly knit together. Sometimes grammar is really influenced by an influence's word choice. And so this is where word studies and grammar can go really, really well together. The impact of words, especially in the grammatical context, can lead to a really good and deep theology. So having said all that, let's offer a quick, good, smoothed out translation on the fly, something like this. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, a glory as or like the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Pretty straightforward. So that'll do it for today's lesson. I want to really encourage you, spend some time with those charts and spend some time trying to get a feel for those prepositions and such. And until next time, may God richly bless you.